Armenia Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, the Armenian government approves TRIPP framework agreement with the United States. Russian-American investor appointed to lead a $200 million TRIPP Plus enterprise fund, and the EU partnership mission in Armenia formally begins operations. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
The Armenian government approved a draft law to ratify the framework agreement with the United States on TRIPP, launching the ratification process. After receiving the initial approval of the Justice Ministry, the agreement will now be reviewed by the Constitutional Court before being sent to Parliament if it is found to comply with the Constitution. The framework agreement was initialed by Foreign Minister Art Mirzoyan and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Yerevan on May 26. Mirzoyan said Armenia will retain full sovereignty over border control, customs, security, taxation, and other state functions, although certain frontline operations could be handled by private operators under a front office, back office model. The additional documents, a shareholders agreement, and the company's charter still need to be finalized. Under the agreement, Armenia and the United States will establish the TRIPP Development Company, which will hold land use and development rights in designated areas of Armenia for 49 years. With the option of a 50-year extension. The United States will hold a 74% stake and Armenia 26%. If the agreement is extended, Armenia's stake will increase to 49% at no additional cost.
And separately, the U.S. State Department has confirmed the appointment of Chicago-based private equity investor Konstantin Sokolov as chair of TRIPP Plus, a new $201 million State Department enterprise fund tied to the TRIPP project. This was reported by The Guardian. The fund is authorized to provide loans, equity investments, and grants across the South Caucasus and Central Asia. No further details about its operations have been released. Sokolov, who was born in Russia, was among dozens of donors to President Donald Trump's White House Ballroom project and contributed more than $12 million to Republican campaigns and committees during Trump's second term. He has not previously held a government position. Sokolov also has business interests in Armenia, including a 20% stake in the country's largest telecommunications operator, Viva Armenia. Radio Liberty has reported that he is the likely buyer of a 49.95% stake in the Terut copper mine, recently sold by Russia's state-controlled VTB Bank. So a lot of interesting developments on that front.
And the European Union Partnership Mission in Armenia formally began operations this week after being established back in April. The EU said the civilian advisory mission will help Armenian institutions strengthen resilience against hybrid threats, including cyber attacks, foreign information manipulation and interference, and illicit financial flows. It will provide strategic advice, technical assistance, and capacity building support while working with international partners on targeted projects. The mission has an initial 2-year mandate and will be staffed primarily by experts seconded from EU member states. Cosmin Georginescu, the former head of the EU Partnership Mission in Moldova, has been appointed head of mission. Armenia requested the mission in December of 2025 after making countering hybrid threats a priority in its strategic agenda with the European Union. EU PM Armenia is separate from the EU mission in Armenia, the EUMA, which has monitored the Armenia-Azerbaijan border since 2023. EUMA's mandate expires in February of 2027 and is not expected to be renewed. And these two missions, though they're EU missions and they have nothing in common, they're not related, though we mention them in relation to one another oftentimes.
Russia's agricultural watchdog has asked Iran's Plant Protection Authority to suspend certification of flowers destined for export to Russia. This following a sharp rise in flower shipments from Iran this year. The agency claims that while certificates list Iran as the country of origin, the appearance and packaging of of the goods match products previously imported from Armenia, which are currently subject to temporary restrictions. It called for bilateral talks to clarify the matter. So, important note for those just joining, Russia has put restrictions on a number of Armenian products, from flowers to produce
to mineral waters to alcohol
to fish.
To fish.
So it's interesting how even if it's coming from Iran, they're trying to bypass that. Meanwhile,
and Maria, speaking of fish, the Armenian government has set new requirements for businesses exporting fish and fish products to the European Union countries. So the requirements apply to companies seeking registration in the EU's trade control and export system. Well, Armenia has held authorization since March of 25 to export scaled fish and fish-derived products to EU countries.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova, in the meantime, said Russia and Armenia are bound by a special relationship and genuine affection between their peoples. Speaking in an interview, Zakharova said Russian support for Armenia has stemmed both from geopolitical considerations and from what she called a sincere love between the two peoples and cultures.
So all this trade restrictions and everything is done out of love,
right?
Maria. I think that's what she's going, because we don't know the context of why she said that. And the Israeli parliament suspended the vote on formally recognizing the Armenian genocide after the Israeli government had unanimously approved a resolution on the matter in late June. Well, they suspending meaning postponing. It came amid rising tensions between Turkey and Israel, including regarding the potential sale of advanced F-35 fighter jets by the United States to Ankara, which was greenlit by President Trump at the recent NATO summit. Turkey and Azerbaijan had both condemned the move, while Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said that Armenia saw no need to react, arguing that staying out of what he called the weaponization of the genocide issues serves Armenia's interests.
The anti-corruption court has ordered Ararat Cement's shares to be placed under state management, pending the outcome of an illicit asset forfeiture case. This was announced by the Prosecutor General's office. The case dates back to 2023, when the prosecutor filed a lawsuit against businessman and Prosperous Armenia party leader Gagik Tsarukyan and individuals affiliated with him, seeking the confiscation of assets to have been acquired through illicit means. The lawsuit seeks the confiscation also of 75 properties and the market value of 10 additional properties, 42 vehicles, stakes in 38 companies, including multi-group concern, Multi-Auto Trend, and Onira Club, or this is known as the Shangri-La Casino, as well as more than $290 million in alleged illicit income.
And also, several businesses linked to Gagik Tsarukyan remain closed as part of criminal investigation against him. In a statement issued from prison, Tsarukyan criticized the suspension of the company's operations. He said the criminal case against him is unrelated to the businesses and that he has not been involved in their management for years. Tsarukyan argued that the closures are intended to pressure him personally and said they have affected thousands of employees and tens of thousands of contractors and partner businesses. And just as a reminder, Gagik Tsarukyan has been placed in pre-trial detention on fraud and money laundering charges. This was since July 6th. Employees of the affected companies have staged repeated protests in recent days, demanding that the businesses be allowed to reopen. Workers at Multi-Tabak and Multi-Stone also say they have not received their salaries for June.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to be affected by this. In a separate case, the building housing Tsarukyan's multi-wellness fitness center has been transferred to Yerevan City Hall. Mayor Dikran Avinyan said the building had been constructed on municipally owned land designated as inalienable in violation of the terms of its agreement with the city. He said the municipality terminated the lease contract, transferring ownership of the building to City Hall, so the land had been leased to Tsarukyan until 2065. Avinyan said the violations were identified about a year ago and that discussions with the company failed to resolve the issue. He rejected suggestions that the move was linked to the criminal case against Tsarukyan, saying this process had begun much earlier and would have proceeded regardless. The mayor said the building will continue operating as a sports center, although its long-term use has yet to be determined and will include certain social components. This whole thing is so unclear because they're not coming out and saying exactly what they intend to do with it. There's speculation that it'll just reopen again, but according to Avinyan, with a social dimension.
And in another case, the anti-corruption court has ordered former Yerevan mayor Gagik Beklaryan to pay 76.9 6.8 million drams. This is about $210,000 in compensation to the Yerevan municipality. The Prosecutor General's office announced this. Beklarian is under house arrest and faces charges of abuse of official authority and large-scale money laundering. According to Armenia's Anti-Corruption Committee, Beklarian illegally acquired 27 properties while serving as head of Yerevan's Kentron district and later as mayor between 2002 and 2010, causing an estimated 2.3 billion drams, this is $6.3 million, in damages to the state. Investigators alleged he laundered assets obtained through criminal activity between 2004 and 2017. Criminal proceedings against Beklarian on 27 counts were initiated in November of 2022.
And as always, the articles that we published this week, one by David Khachadurian called Beyond Symbolism, Israel, the Armenian Genocide in Gaza. And as you said in the report, Rubina, Israel, always remembers the genocide when it has issues with Turkey, and this was no exception. So he looked at Israel's move to recognize the genocide, and he's arguing that it's neither a legal judgment or not even a purely moral act. Israel itself is facing genocide allegations over Gaza. Therefore, its decision raises difficult questions about law, politics, memory, and the consistency of state recognition. It was a really fascinating read, and he looked at it from a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, it really was, because he's basically saying that once you utter the word, you cannot take it back. And you're, especially in comparison to the Armenian genocide, when their ICJ cannot rule regarding the Armenian genocide because it doesn't have retrospective powers, the Armenian genocide is left for states to recognize. Therefore, by recognizing as a state or saying the word genocide in this context, you're also saying that other states can equally use the word in regards to what you're doing in Gaza. So that was a kind of very interesting twist in his article. And coming back to justice and the justice system, which we spoke a lot about today.
And I think we'll be speaking a lot about in the future.
You did do an It Has to Be Said piece about judicial reform.
Yes.
Because so far what we're seeing is a lot of very suspicious timing with all these cases, right?
Yeah, look, we're all for justice and accountability, and we're all for, people being brought to justice if they've committed criminal acts, but everything is right now is in such flux, and we need institutional overhaul, institutional change, and not only justice, but everything. But we decided to start off with justice this time. Let's see where it leads us to.
And we had a piece by Olesya Vartanian, part of her Beyond the Borders column. It's called What Cyprus Teaches About Living with an Unresolved Conflict. And it's this very interesting reflection, personal reflection, like sitting in Cyprus, seeing,
at the dividing line.
At the dividing line, and people just going for groceries and coming back, and what checkpoints mean for Armenians, and what checkpoints, for example, speaking of Gaza and Palestine, right? Checkpoints mean in other people's experiences.
Mean something completely different, yeah. And she's saying that maybe there's a way to live side by side, even though the conflict has not been resolved, even though there's no peace treaty per se. Anyway, it's a very interesting thing and food for thought for sure. And we published, speaking of everything else, Why Azerbaijan Still Shapes Armenia-Turkey Normalization. Our Haran Shtermoyan sort of did a dive into the role that Baku plays in Ankara's decisions about opening its border and establishing normal relations with Armenia. And this has been going on for years, and why it keeps stalling.
And the piece we published just today, Power to the Public, Where the Market Ends and the Republic Begins. It's a relatively new contributor to EVN Report, Andre Bogosian. We look forward to his pieces as well. It's about Armenia's takeover of electric networks of Armenia. And he's saying this instance is more than just about ownership, drawing on international examples. He examines what makes an electricity system resilient, competitive, and accountable, and why public control of critical infrastructure may strengthen both sovereignty and democracy.
Yeah, you might disagree with it, but he makes a lot of interesting points, and I look forward to it, because these are things that we need to be discussing in the public sort of discourse. So that was a very interesting piece. And then by Maria Gunko, her Outside In, it's called A Bathtub in Stepanavan, and it's a fascinating story because she sees this fancy bathtub placed in a very awkward position in a hotel room in Stepanavan, where there's a big window and whoever's walking by could see you using the bathtub, and it was like this beautiful, sexy little piece of furniture. But she remembers, and as we do, how bathtubs were really utilitarian holding tanks, if you will, for water, for everything else when we didn't have water, when water was very unreliable. And so how the functionality of a bathtub, where one is about survival, the other just has an expensive price tag on it.
Yes, and also kind of how she always, on several layers, turns things on their head, because usually when bathtubs are right in front of the windows, you have something to look at. And in her case, it was just the very second floor building. She would be the more interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, indeed.
And just for everyone who's in Armenia or wants
Coming
to
to
feel
Armenia.
additional FOMO, is not here. We did publish the July itinerary, which is our cultural calendar. So have a look at that.
With a bit of irony and sarcasm.
As always,
As
with
always, by
Viken.
Viken.
Yes.
But yeah, look, every time I read his itinerary, it's like, oh, why aren't I going? And the city is crazy. There's so many things happening. With Golden Apricot is going on at the moment, and a lot of events. So yeah, check out itinerary for sure.
I will be going to Silvina's exhibition today.
Is
and
it today?
hopefully, yes, and hopefully catch the movie later, Outliving Shakespeare.
And that's the kind of week it's been here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we'll be back again next week.